This is the richest country in Africa, the Seychelles, with a GDP per capita of over 32,000. For comparison, this is roughly similar to Chile in South America or Montenegro in Europe. The Seychelles is quite a small country in size and population, with 121,000 people living on a land area of less than 200 square miles. So this begs the question, how is such a small island wealthier than larger, more populous African countries like Nigeria, or even a more traditionally wealthy country like Egypt, which has a GDP per capita of less than 20,000? Well, like most things, it's complicated. And to understand why the Seychelles are so wealthy, we need to understand why the Seychelles are, well, the Seychelles. Well, it all started about 4.5 billion years ago when rocks started to, okay, maybe we can skip a bit ahead in history. The Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama first sighted the Seychelles in 1503, but he was busy trying to get to East Africa, so he didn't stick around. The first person to actually stick around on the island and explore was Lazare Piquet, I hope I pronounced that right, in 1740, and found the island so beautiful and abundant with food that he actually named the main island of the Seychelles Île d'Abondance, which, as you can guess, means Island of Abundance. Piquet was apparently not very good at his job and was sent back in 1744 due to his poor quality maps, when he renamed the main island Mahe, after his boss, and what was probably an attempt to get back in his boss's good graces. Yet the islands weren't settled until 1770, when French settlers started a colony on the island of St. Anne. There were some initial economic difficulties and just a bit of starvation, but these were solved by importing slaves from the nearby French colony Mauritius. Then, in 1790, the French Revolution started, and the Seychelles decided that they can govern themselves, and supplied French corsairs, who were basically pirates that only stole from the enemy, which at this time was Great Britain. This upset the British, who took full control of the island in 1811. This didn't bother the Seychellois, yes, that's what they're called, until in 1835, the British outlawed slavery, which was a big hit to the island's mostly plantation-based economy. Up until this point, the Seychelles were governed by the nearby colony Mauritius, but the Seychellois wanted freedom to govern themselves, and were successful when they got their own governor in 1903. The Seychelles then enjoyed sustained growth, only interrupted by the World Wars, which devastated their mostly export-based economy. The islands finally gained their independence in 1976 and had democratic elections, which lasted for about a year until the Communist Party had a coup d'etat and took over the country, implementing one-party elections, which continued for the next 15 years until 1991. Coincidentally, when the Soviet Union fell, the ruling party implemented multi-party elections. So now that you know way more about the history of these tiny islands than you ever wanted to, how are they so rich? Well, I promise you that impromptu history lesson was important because it was necessary to understand the modern reality of the Seychelles and its economy. Since its independence in 1976, the GDP per capita in the Seychelles has increased almost 2,200%. So what's the main factor in this rise? Well, throughout its history, the only way to get to the Seychelles was by boat. But in 1972, they opened the Seychelles International Airport, which instantly started a huge tourism boom to the island, helped by their knowledge of English and French from back when the islands were a colony. The effect tourism had on the economy of the Seychelles cannot be understated, with the Seychellois GDP growing from less than 50 million at the time of their independence to over 150 million 4 years later. Yet other nations blessed by tourism haven't had the same success as the Seychelles, such as the Maldives, which is a much more widely known tourist destination. I believe this is due to the surprisingly low levels of corruption in the country. Even after almost 50 years of rule by the same party, the Seychelles is the least corrupt country in all of Africa, according to Transparency International. And the government knows the danger of relying on one resource too much, looking at examples such as Venezuela, whose over-reliance on oil crippled their economy when prices fell. So they've taken efforts to diversify the economy. These efforts have borne fruit, and now one of the most important parts of the Seychellois economy is fishing. So much so that they export over $500 million worth of fish products each year, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. But does any of this wealth trickle down to its citizens? Well, yes. According to the UN's Human Development Index, which measures health, education, and quality of life, the Seychelles has the highest score in all of Africa, with a score of 0.802, which is considered very high. The next highest African country is Kenya, with a score of 0.062. It's an inspiring story. A nation passed between empires, being home to pirates, and which didn't even gain its independence until 50 years ago, is now the wealthiest, happiest, and most developed country on its continent.